Speaking of queens, I did read a book the month before by the ultimate drag queen. Give me a moment to do a quick change. This is my nod to not just people who love art. I love the rainbow. I love the spectrum. But this is also my nod to the LGBTQ community, because the next book that I will be reviewing is the memoir from the ultimate drag queen, RuPaul, The House of Hidden Meanings, which is also one of the books that I marked off for the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge. I went to see RuPaul in person to his lecture at the Boulevard Auditorium at USC earlier this year. This was on April 20th. This was the weekend of the Festival of Books Ideas Exchange. And this was the first time that I actually had gone into a theater to hear from an entertainment personality. Even though he didn't sign the book, what they did give was everyone was given these little, I guess they're like labels. So to my understanding, he signed all of these. So, and I have the ticket as well. So here's to you, Ru. This book had surprisingly some very unique quotes and passages that I absolutely loved, and I feel that I really do want to be able to share this with you. So stay tuned. We'll get to the book review in just a moment, but first, I actually want to bring up something that I'm going to start doing for all of my book reviews. I call it a word alert. So, in the last video, I discussed certain titles that were in reference to Shakespeare's works, such as What Dreams May Come, Brave New World, To Thine Own Self Be True, and so on and so forth. And they're basically all alluding to Shakespeare. But I do want to make sure that everyone is aware of the word allusion. Don't get it mixed up with illusion. Here's the difference. So an allusion, spelled with an A, is basically a figure of speech. It is a brief, indirect, implied reference to either a person, a place, event, or, in some cases, another work of literature. And it is basically to help readers to get a better understanding, for them to reference whatever it is that they are reading to something else that is a lot more well-known. As an example, one of my favorite country singers is Jamie O'Neal. One of her top songs that she wrote and sang was called Trying to Find Atlantis. And it's all about the journey of trying to find the perfect man. It's like trying to find Atlantis. Well, what exactly is Atlantis? It was this place of an entire civilization that somehow disappeared. And then there are some that are led to believe that it is the lake that surrounds the island of Santorini that supposedly disappeared with a great volcanic eruption. But in the song, trying to find the perfect man is like trying to find Atlantis. It's almost impossible to find the perfect man or the perfect soulmate, woman, you name it. So that is an allusion to Atlantis. An illusion is basically a mistaken idea or something that is false, that is unreal, but it seems true. It seems to be real. And the work of illusion is basically through the work of today's magicians that you see at stage shows, or like in Vegas, for instance, or even in this case, the Magic Castle. So there's allusion and illusion. Those are your vocabs for today, and back to the book review. Let's begin with the prologue. This is one of the first things that he reflected on when he was riding a bike back through the city of Atlanta. This is after his friend Sherry's death. And this is what RuPaul states. There was the corner where on a Christmas Eve years earlier, Getting off my shift to go-go dancing at the club, I walked past a bag of toys that somebody had donated to charity. Contents spilled onto the street, and looking up at me was a stuffed donkey with one button eye. For whatever reason, I felt a rush of tenderness so big and so potent that I picked it up off the ground and carried it home with me, and I have slept with it for the last 40 years. Isn't it strange? I'm so much older now, but I still remember the way it was to know the ache inside of me. Reflecting on stuffed dolls, I don't believe I've ever gotten rid of any of my stuffed animals. This one is my little baby bear that I've had since I was born. It used to have a little pink flower here over the ear. And my mother said when I was a baby, I would go screaming in my crib because apparently I thought it was a bug. This is Scooter. He's a TY plushie. And I had him with me the entire time when I was hospitalized, when I had my partial hysterectomy 2 years ago, and I needed to have something with me, and he was a great comfort leading up to the surgery and when I woke up, and he was with me the entire length of recovery. So yeah, so Scooter plays a really beautiful role in my life. This is the passage that RuPaul states about, and possibly how he came up with the title for the House of Hidden Meanings. This is what his late friend Larry T said to him. Libra represents the 12th house of Scorpius's hidden meanings, he told me. As if this were hugely important, after the drugs wore off, I realized it was nonsense, but it was beautiful nonsense. And it stayed with me forever, maybe because I liked the way it sounded. The House of Hidden Meanings. Or maybe it was because of how I saw myself as a detective of the universe, searching for clues, trying to understand what it all meant. So let's go back. I am not a Libra. I am a Sagittarius. I'm not quite sure exactly if mine represents a house with a numerical number. I know that my numerical number is 10. I was also, based on the Chinese calendar, I was born in the year of the dog. But according to the year as well, I'm also known as being born in the year of the water dog. But it's interesting where he calls that, where he says, beautiful nonsense. It's like something that you hear, you could take off as finding it absolutely ridiculous. But in what you sense is ridiculous could also be something that is profoundly beautiful in its own way. And I find that very comforting somehow. Life comes in seasons. There are the seasons where you are driving through a snowstorm, just trying to keep your eye on the road ahead to stay alive. But then there are those seasons when the snow globe is being shaken all around you, and you're standing in one place, looking up to try to see where the scattered world is all going to fall. When it finally settles, that's when you find yourself in the house of hidden meanings. You have to dismantle the old to make space for something new. Life comes in seasons. So if you can imagine yourself, you're driving through a snowstorm, trying to stay alive, trying to see the road ahead, and you're just trying to figure out, my goodness, what's going to happen if I drive just a little bit forward a few inches? Am I going to hit a curve? Am I going to fall off the edge of a cliff? Who knows? And then there's that point where the snow globe is shaken. So imagine if the entire world was to be shaken, and all of these factors, all of these different elements to your life were suddenly shattered and begin to like descend everywhere to a settled where it all suddenly comes to a stop and everything makes sense. And he says, only then when you find yourself in the house of hidden meanings. So I'm not entirely sure if I have found myself in my house of hidden meanings. We all go through different moves from house to house. Sometimes our parents' former homes where they used to live will have different meanings for them as it did for the generation after. What I loved about RuPaul's lecture is that at the lecture, which none of us knew, is that his 3 sisters were there. So as an example, he talks about the time when his older sister, Renata, had said the word picnic. And this opened up a whole new world for him. Take a listen. "This is a picnic," Renata said. "By naming it, she was making the moment something more than it was. We weren't just eating cookies on a blanket. The ceremony, the theater of it, that was what anointed this as something extraordinary. The creation of a kind of magic." So the very word picnic, how many of you have actually been on a picnic? I've been on picnics. And what is it that you bring with you on a picnic? You bring a blanket. Sometimes you'll bring a little basket of food, of like cutlery, plateware. Sometimes you'll bring a chair. You'll bring drinks. And, but do you sometimes go on a picnic by yourself? Have you ever tried that? And usually, I never really thought of it as like a type of what he says, the theatrical extraordinary magic of what it is. I've never really been to a community picnic, but what I have done is that with my girlfriends, we will often go to the Kingsman Shakespeare company at Callow, and we'll usually sit in a lawn box. It's like dinner and a show. So it's interesting that when he says by naming it, she was making the moment something more than what it was. So as an example, Simon Callow is an English actor, and he did his one-man show based on Peter Ackroyd's The Mystery of Charles Dickens. And he's going over the lines from Nicholas Nickleby. "The stage!" "The stage?" cried Nicholas. "The theatrical profession." Just by naming the stage, the very platform behind him, gave it a type of magic that Nicholas Nickleby had never even considered before. By going to the drive-in movies, he got the idea of what it meant to be glamorous. In commercials, people were glamorous. An adult like Edie Adams vamping it on a spot for Muriel cigars in the style of Mae West. Why not pick one up and smoke it sometime? She intoned, standing in a surreal musical set, wearing a gown and drawn to her temples and dark painted lips. I wanted to be just like her, gorgeous, in control, performing to a rapt audience, and perhaps feminine, in control of a man's attention. He was pretty young when he was kind of already under the influence of the people on the television screen that he considered were glamorous. We have these old recordings of these performances, and one of them was the Sleeping Beauty performance at Covent Garden. And the royal guest of honor, if I'm not mistaken, might have been Princess Margaret. But to me, the reason why I always dressed up for going to a show, but going to theater, that popped into my head that to go to the theater was a glamorous event. You wore your special clothes up to the nines. It was just one of those things. And I would want to look my best. And as I was growing up, I realized, you know what? It's not just that. You dress to respect the ones performing. Back to the book review. On that screen, there was also a sense of righteousness. There's that word. Of progress that was reflected in the shows we watched. I watched cartoons. And I also watched Sesame Street. There was something about the Muppets that I absolutely loved. They catered to me. But on Sesame Street, it wasn't just entertainment to me. It was a sense of righteousness that education was well respected by these Muppets that appeared to us as kids. Back to the review. Mob mentality is dumb and dangerous, and the mob is never out for justice. They're only out for blood. the number one evil that we face is unconsciousness. And I knew early on that it would be perilous to show that you could pierce the veil. What does it mean to be unconscious? It means to not be conscious of the way things are at the moment. If one was to pierce the veil of unconsciousness, it would be like piercing the unconscious veil of right-wing conservatives who do not acknowledge the LGBTQ community members. There are people who do not accept people who are different, and it's even worse in other countries. As part of my ERWC curriculum, one of them was language, gender, and culture. It was this author who was reflecting on a young man from Brazil who was walking across the bridge, but he was walking very femininely. This mob of boys, they apparently knew him, and they thought that he was a complete embarrassment to the masculine community, that he was going to bring shame to this community if he continued to act the way he did, if he continued to walk the way he did. They thought that he was setting a bad example. So what do you do with a bad example? Eliminate it. So what did they do? In this article, they attacked him and they threw his body off a bridge. Like he was nothing. Back to the book review. He turned to Flip Wilson. They would watch the Flip Wilson show. Now, I had never heard of Flip Wilson until I watched this TV Classics set. There was a segment called Gender Benders, and you had these men on TV shows who dressed the opposite. He says, when my mom came home from work, I watched the Flip Wilson show with her. Flip's signature character was a woman named Geraldine, which was just Flip in false eyelashes, maybe some lipstick, and a wig. Flip would play Geraldine as a flight attendant or meter maid, and the guest star, someone like Dean Martin, would fall for her. When they made advances, Geraldine would scream, "Don't touch me! Don't you put your hands on me! You don't know me!" And we would howl with laughter. It was even more significant that this character was popular even though it was transgressive. A man dressed as a woman. Flip was someone who was violating the pact and still winning, which meant that such a thing was possible. So what he was saying was that people who dressed in drag and were willing to become as feminine as possible, it's how far is one willing to go the extra length and to make such a thing possible, that it is possible for you to dress up in order for you to feel powerful. To me, I've never really had an issue with someone who was different. I've been very much an open person, accepting. I do not want to say tolerate. There's a misgiving about the word tolerate, which I'll get to that in just a minute. I prefer having an open mind. But if you're someone who is into firearms, and if you're someone who shouts in the name of terrorism in order to bring justice, I wouldn't get too close. That's where I draw the line. If you proceed to bring harm, if you cause harm for your cause, that is where you're in the wrong. Honestly, it's common sense. But going back to what I mentioned before, so what I mean by there's a misgiving about the word tolerate is to allow existence without interference. On a more positive note, it means to support. But a misgiving would be to support something that is not socially acceptable, that others will find offensive. I went to the Museum of Tolerance. What the Museum of Tolerance is asking visitors, educators, and anyone who does not know about the Holocaust or the civil rights riots, yes, you are supporting those, you are lifting those who were hurt, but guess what, guys? This is still happening today. Yet, why is it that people tolerated this type of social outcasting of the Jews of Europe? How could people tolerate that? Back to the book review. Many of us have a secret girl living within us. Mine awakened when I was 12 years old, and the film Cleopatra Jones came out amid the blaxploitation film explosion. As powerful as your secret girl can be, she's equally dangerous when you refuse to acknowledge her. For someone to come out to their family is very, very tough, especially if they know their family is very strictly religious, strictly conservative, maybe even sometimes, maybe a little too liberal. But it doesn't even have to be just a secret girl living within us. What about a secret boy living within a girl? Or could it be a secret talent? Or maybe a secret, how about we switch out the word girl in this? Many of us have a secret author living within us. What if there's been a secret author inside of you that you're not answering? You have a story in mind, but you're not writing it down. You're not heeding to its call. In other words, you're not allowing the muse to take over. Are you one of those people that has something secretly hidden inside of you that you haven't answered the call? What could that be? You could be someone who's in their 50s, 60s, or 70s, and there's something you've always wanted to do, and it's been killing you every day because you haven't answered that call. And at one point, he looked at a poster of this person named Sylvester. Sylvester is this transvestite in San Francisco who puts on shows. It was complete anarchy to do what he was doing. It was rock and roll. And I knew, even as a teenager, that it was important. So at this point, there's change beginning to happen. People who are different, people who would dress in drag, were now taking it seriously. To say, well, if these people can be the trendsetters, and this is something that appeals to me because I feel strong about it, that I feel that I am meant to be part of this, I feel that I can find my family here, then why not? And this is from a person named Belinda. This is after they had smoked some marijuana, but he quoted something from her. "We are all witches," she said very seriously as we sat on the ground getting high. "And the greatest spell we can cast is laughter." That was a lesson much more precious than anything I picked up in a class. So RuPaul is quoting off that the greatest spell that we can cast is laughter. Something funny happens. Something that, Flip Wilson comes dressing not as a man, but as a woman. And he's showing skin. He's pushing the buttons. He's making an impact. He's making people say, "Oh my God, look, it's a man dressed as a waitress. What can we expect from this?" Just by doing that, and it makes us laugh. That's a spell. But in a way, Flip Wilson was basically putting on the guise of what it meant to be a woman. He gave them a voice to speak up for themselves. And women in social cultures were still secondary. Look what happened with the election. People are not willing to see a woman take the White House yet. I say that's a bunch of BS. The fact that he listened to this Belinda, this lesson about the spell that we can cast is laughter. He says, "This lesson was much more precious than anything I ever picked up in a class." And I think back to some of the things that some of my former teachers stated that were not a part of the curriculum that I clearly remember. It's the anecdotes, something that they learned. As an example, one of my teachers, and this is a shout out to you, Mrs. Taylor. In high school, I was involved with drama for the whole 4 years. The last 2 years, I actually took the drama class, and it was period 3. We were learning about that as performers, we had to be in character 5 to 10 seconds before we went on stage, and that once we left the stage, it takes 5 to 10 seconds for that character to wash away. She says the same thing most often applies to film actors too. And that's when she went off on a tangent and warned us about something. Well, what I learned that day is that if your character must exit from you, because if you keep that character around, the character may eventually take over. At one point, RuPaul did get to perform. He says at one point, this Bill wanted to put up a Tennessee Williams play called Camino Royale. This is not Tennessee Williams' greatest work, Bill said dryly. This is a deeply flawed text, but it's a great piece to give us the space to get messy. RuPaul said, I played a drag queen called Queenie. When you have an eye for detail, you notice things that other people don't. He says, I became a scholar of the little things, those minute details that tell you everything about someone or something, the little peeling corner that pulls away to reveal something underneath you might never suspect. Let's say, for instance, how many here have seen the painting of the Mona Lisa? There's something that is so beautiful yet so mysterious about the painting. It was the one painting that Leonardo da Vinci, he never really sold to his patron. It is said that he carried that painting around with him for the rest of his life. And what if you were to become a scholar of the Mona Lisa? Do you notice the minute details? If you were to peel, when he says to peel away the corner that pulls away to reveal something underneath you never suspect. Because when you peel away who this character is, it's the little things that slowly make up the big picture of this character that you are portraying, which is the essence for every actor and actress who take on a character. Now, this next part I feel is very important. This is from the chapter called Power. The time where RuPaul was offered to shoot a semi-automatic gun. Take a listen. Having been raised by television and the movies, I knew that every hero and villain has a gun. To hold that in my possession next to my body and pull that trigger, you could feel viscerally the strength and the damage that this weapon could cause. I felt omnipotent in a way I'd never experienced before. I had imagined it the way it might feel, but this exceeded the limits of my imagination. It was intoxicating, this feeling, but it was also frightening and dangerous. Why? Ultimately, illusory. You can only feel it when you're holding the gun in your hands. It's not enduring. It disappears as soon as it's been taken from you. The big lie of our lives is that we are powerless, that we need something else, like a job or a partner or fame or the dopamine hijack of a hit of cocaine or the chilly metallic weight of a gun to grant us power. We mistake easy pleasure or a rush of adrenaline for power. But real power isn't a high. It's something else, grounded and secure. Much as we seek power in every corner of our lives, it's always already in us. It's impossible to be powerless if you recognize that you yourself are power. Life is power. Finding the power within yourself, that's the hard part. To me, that was kind of a shock, reading that he fired a semi-automatic weapon, not at anyone. It was just over a field, and it was when he and his friend were very, very high. But to have that type of temporary power when one holds a gun, it reminds me very much of the scene with Gandalf and Frodo. It's in the first film of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So when Gandalf tells Frodo about the ring, its history, and who's after it, Frodo tells him to take the ring from him. He says, I am offering it to you. And then Gandalf turns right around and he says, don't tempt me, Frodo. You don't understand. With this ring, I would want to use it to do good. But then he tells Frodo, but through me. it would unleash a power that is beyond my control. When one has so much power, what do they do with it? It ultimately destroys them. For what Trump thinks that he has, I'm not sure if he's changed allegiance, but when you see someone shaking hands with Putin, when you see someone who shake hands with Kim Jong-un, these are both dictators, and they're bringing their countries to ruin. If that doesn't tell you what's happening, that their power is ultimately destroying what they set out. It's bound to happen here. Should this person that somehow was elected and allowed in office, I'm sorry. America has never been a dictatorship. It has never been a monarchy, and it never will be that way. So Americans, y'all better wake up. We cannot allow a person who provoked followers to overturn the election when he was still president. And I'm going to say this. He violated the 14th Amendment, and people who voted for him are probably not aware of that. I think we all need a day or two to read the Constitution, what it means to be a U.S. citizen. And for anyone else who wants to be a future president, you better read the presidential rules when it comes to this country. It is imperative to read them if you are that serious. He says the big lie of our lives, the biggest lie, is that we are powerless. It's impossible to be powerless if you recognize that you yourself are power. Life is power. So he's saying that within each and every one of us if we say we are powerless, then we are helpless. If we unconsciously continue to think that we are powerless, to think that we are helpless, the unconsciousness, that great evil, is going to become the powerful one. Can we allow that to happen? Within every one of us, there is a secret power, whether it be that secret girl, whether it be that secret guy, whether it could be that secret author or writer or singer or artist within us. How can we stand back and not answer the call? You're answering a secret talent within you that you know you have. And if you don't answer it, it's always going to be nagging at you. And for people, sometimes they will, there's this thing of regret. What if I did this? What if I did that? What if they don't? How about the film Million Dollar Baby, for instance? Maggie, who was a waitress. She was poor as a church mouse, and she would go to gym and work out with the punching bag. And there's Clint Eastwood's character looking at her going, she's going about it all wrong. And he says, and she's like, well, if you want to teach me, then please do so. It's my birthday and I got celebrating to do. And he says, all right, I'll take you on, but you're going to have to do exactly as I say. For those of you who don't know what happens in A Million Dollar Baby, Maggie becomes a star sensation. At one point in one of the great boxing matches, Maggie lets her guard down and she's hit from the side and she falls and she basically severed her spine. And Frankie is filled with regret. And he goes to church and he is asking God, why? Why did I allow myself to teach her? Why did I not tell her enough to say, keep your dukes up? Never take your eyes off your opponent. Why this? Why that? He's doing everything he can so that she can fulfill the second part of her life. And so she's pleading with Frankie to basically help end her life while she can still hear the cheers of the crowd. Freeman's character tells him, he says, there are millions of people in this world who are scrubbing floors, who are waitressing, who were never given a chance to show their talent, to show the power within themselves. He says, for Maggie, for you to give her that power, you gave her something. You gave her that chance to shine. And she will always be grateful for that. Some people can live for 60, 70, 80 years and have nothing to show for it, nothing to be thankful for. For Maggie, she's like in her 30s, maybe mid 30s when this terrible accident takes place, and he says she did what most people could never do in a lifetime. But it's all about how you answer the call within yourself. Another one of the people who was a big influence in his life was David Bowie, and he has this to say: I was a devotee of David Bowie, whose album Scary Monsters I played constantly while I was driving. I was excited when he was going to be interviewed on 2020 about his Broadway debut in The Elephant Man. For him to perform as the Elephant Man, I actually saw my friend perform as part of the Three Fates in this production of The Elephant Man up in Fresno several years ago. But The Elephant Man is the story of not John Merrick. His real name was Joseph Merrick. And he was an Englishman who, I forgot what kind of disease deformed his body. For a person in his state, he was basically a part of a freak, what they call back then the freak show, or a sideshow freak. It's how society views them. Society is so used to the norm that anything that is abnormal is considered dangerous, or you can catch something if you get close to this person. It's really sad. But it was about the Elephant Man and how he's being treated in the London hospital up until the time that he decides, because of his head, he couldn't lay flat, and he always wanted to know what it was like to fall asleep, to be able to sleep lying down. If he did that, his head literally would break his neck. And that's what happened. Going back, and again, here's this vision of Atlanta. The vision of Atlanta, the same vision that had sold me. It was common knowledge among Black people that this was the place to be, more so than D.C. or Houston or New York. Atlanta was the place where Black culture was being shaped. For me, it's very ironic because Atlanta, Georgia is part of the Deep South. Growing up, I learned about the Civil War and even before that, I was learning about American history when it came to American independence. One of the original clauses that was part of the Declaration was slavery. They had to omit it because the delegates, the committees from the Carolinas and anything south of that did not agree. They had to get rid of that in the Declaration, because otherwise it would not be unanimous, and we would never have, who knows, we could have never have been an independent country. No matter what I heard or read or was told, it seemed like the South would be the last place that the Black culture of America would possibly return to. To me, it was just, that was a bad sign. And it's like, even to this day, when I was watching MTV Cribs, and I see a lot of the Black entertainers and the sportsmen, that some of these people live in the Deep South in America. I'm like, what the heck are they doing there? And so to read this, that this was the place to be, that's just, I don't know. That's very the opposite of what I would think. As an example, for Jews to escape Europe, for Jews to escape Germany, for Jews to escape the oppression in Russia, when are you going to have Jews returning to those areas? We were on a trip to Europe in 2001. And the first stop, which I did mention, was Berlin. My dad told me that he lost acquaintances because we traveled there. That's like saying that's the place of where Jewish hatred was born and bred, and the ultimate anti-Semitic attack in the world. How dare you go to that country to tour it? For a Black family to see one of their members go back to the Deep South, where there's civil unrest and where people do not do not acknowledge, where you still have the hate groups that do not acknowledge Black people, African Americans, Black Americans, you name it. It's like, how can you live in an area like that? That to me, I question, why would being in Atlanta, the place to be where Black culture was being, it was being shaped before by an all white society, but now it's like the power was back to them. So maybe it's a good thing. Who knows? When RuPaul's mother said to him at one point, your father wants to talk to you because he saw you in Balboa Park with some people that they know are gay. So he said something about, like, you have never been a part of my life at all. How dare you dictate to me who you say that I should hang out with when you were never there for me in the first place. But in another way, he says, my father had been so involved with my sisters. He loved the ladies, fawned over them, praised their beauty, adored them. This was how the world worked after all. What would it be like for me to become the prettiest girl of all? Now that would be real power. So for him, in a way, the father's absence and the way that he handled the situation between his son and his daughters kind of shaped RuPaul's life to say, why can't I be as pretty as them that you can fawn over me? Maybe then we could have that real father-daughter relationship. He says, how do you put into words the way it feels to find your people, to belong, to finally be understood, to know the connective tissue that binds you invisibly to others? What does it feel like to find your group of people, to find the group that is calling your name? Outside of education, it's singing. I love singing. And I got a chance to perform in two operettas. I enjoyed it. The drive to and from the theater sucked. It was a 30 to 40 minute drive, and at night. But I really did enjoy performing. I enjoyed becoming someone else. And as a matter of fact, talk about finding power. For me, being able to do this is something that I love doing. I love being able to share my thoughts, not be afraid to speak my mind, and to comment, to reveal, to be able to share to a wide media on this platform. But as a matter of fact, by wearing this Renaissance medieval costume that I just happened to get on Amazon, I feel like me. I feel better when I'm dressed like this. I feel powerful, and I'm in my zone. And that's what I absolutely love. That's why I love the podcast. I love reaching out to people and finding out what made you, you. And like, I loved enjoying and even reaching out to one of my favorite YouTubers, Janine West of Forest and Fawn. I love the interview because she was not an author at the time. I think now she's coming up with these stories that she came up with for her channel. But I loved talking with her. It was just such a unique experience. And I mean, for her, she found a way to connect, and that was through sharing her love of junk journaling, and then it found her way to teaching people about Wicca, her witchy Wednesdays, and which she would do all these little crafts. She's become her own light. What it would be like for all of us to become our own light. This is from the chapter Duality. Life is full of dualities. Night and day, black and white, yin and yang, good and evil, birth and death, love and fear. You can't have one without the other. It takes two to create the magnetic pull to generate energy in the first place. This is the natural order that everything Everything in contrast hangs in perfect balance. I always felt both male and female. Counterintuitively, I left more masculine in drag than did out of drag because I knew that I could command more power that way. Power being a currency that was typically conferred to men. As a feminine black man, in violation of society's norms by virtue of just existing, drag was a way to reclaim the power I had always been denied. If that doesn't tell you the definition of what real drag is, I don't know what will. I'm not sure if there's a better definition of drag than what RuPaul said in that passage, duality. Drag provided a type of permission to be something in the middle, or neither, or both. Drag made a mockery of the sacred cow of identity and all the societal expectations that came along with it. This act of rebellion was an unspoken alliance that united us. In a system where things insisted on being one or the other, drag was everything. That made it magic. The opposing forces that I felt most palpably were my optimism and my cynicism. You know, when people are talking about you're either a man or you are a woman, and for people who dress in drag, it's sort of a combination of both. It's like that scene from Sleeping Beauty when Flora and who was the other one? Merriweather, when they're both fighting over the color of Aurora's dress. They're using their wands to, splash the power of color onto the dress. And at one point, they both aim their wands at the same time at the dress. And look what happens. The dress becomes this mess of blue and pink, but it's not one or the other. It's like a mesh of the two. That's what he's saying that drag is. It's like it's a mesh of the two forces. I like I say, I write down everything that I find is unique, but this one I highlighted because it has to do with manifestation, which I'm still struggling with, to be honest, but this to me is the best. It's right here. It would take a lifetime to unravel the pain of not being seen as someone who was deserving of that sort of romantic attention. At the time, I knew only that I could use it as jet fuel to propel me forward into my destiny, which was, of course, fame. And so until the world reorganized itself to recognize that, I would do the only rational thing I could do. I would act as if I was already famous. After all, it was self-evident that I was a star. The psychic had predicted it. And what did stars do? They created projects for themselves. Hollywood isn't calling? Do it yourself. Start a band. Produce films you can star in. Design your own clothes. Write your own books. Create your own merchandise. Build your own empire. Become your own icon. If that is not manifestation of power, of being able to say to yourself, yeah, if they're not going to answer, then do it yourself. If you want to be recognized, then start recognizing yourself. Put your own recognition into work. And that is how people who have been able to help manifest what they want to do. They can produce films. They design their own clothes, their own fashion brand. People who write stories that people would want to read, to become your very own icon. This is how Jim Carrey manifested how he was able to become an actor. He already imagined that he was famous. He would be at the top of the hill and drive down, imagining that he was in, the best car that he could be. And he even wrote himself a $10 million check for services to acting or whatever, to be paid back in 4 years. And he put that in his pocket and he carried it with him wherever he went. So imagine if you were to say to yourself, I'm going to be a national bestseller. Is it measurable? Is it attainable? I have all of this on my board. The reality is I'm not practicing what I'm preaching, so I better get to it. I mean, I started with my little children's book. I wasn't expecting it to be a big thing. Honestly, it was a birthday gift, and I just wanted to see, what it was like to do that first startup project, what it was like to reach out to someone who saw that I had potential, and then also referred me to an illustration company that was able to actually help me with the illustrations using one of their illustrators. Because right now I can't write normally like I used to. And like I said, to be honest, I don't remember how I used to write. And since my thyroid surgery, I've had no regular grip on the pen. It is a constant struggle. So if you're looking at this and you're looking at all of this handwriting I've done, well, how have I done that? That's because I've used the only ergonomic tool that I find that is the most helpful. And for me, it's the ring pen. And I love handwriting. Most of the time, most of the stories that I write will be little ideas. Maybe I'll write them down and then but the rest of the time I'm using my laptop to type them up because it's the easiest way that I can get it started. The best thing, the most important thing is to hold oneself accountable. So that's one thing that I need to do, because I have a few other stories in mind. Just need to write them up and put my power into it. As a child of the 80s, the spread of the AIDS epidemic was paramount. He says, for reasons I couldn't entirely explain, I was afraid. It wasn't just the threat of AIDS, which had appeared on the news beginning in 1981 and created a culture of anxiety, a specter that can turn up at any moment. It was understood that by having unprotected sex, you could catch it, and soon it was common to see condoms and literature passed out in clubs. It was terrifying, and yet it was a looming threat for which there was no cure. So what were we to do? We went to protests, talked about it constantly, and partied as if Rome was burning. For me, in the 80s growing up, I became aware of AIDS, I want to say when I was I was 3. And the story of Ryan White was the big news. What happened to him? And he was a kid who was dying of AIDS, and the society was just up in arms. This was a preteen, for God's sake. And he had a disease that everyone was so afraid of. I worked as a nurse/technician for an ophthalmologist for about 7 months. And I don't remember if I was wearing gloves, but I was in charge of putting the utensils after certain procedures into the sanitation machine, whatever this thing was. And I stuck my finger on one of the suture blades, and the ophthalmologist immediately took me aside and he says, you're bleeding. We need to make sure that you are okay. And we're going to put you down to get your lab work. And we're also going to want you to take an AIDS test. And I was like, I remember I had to drive to the hospital. I was there for 3 hours just trying to go through triage, and then they had to do the blood test. But here's the thing, and I'm not sure if they changed the rules since then. I had to wait for 3 days. And what I experienced from that, when they call you up, I'm not sure if things have changed, but when I was called up, the nurse took me aside to another room to relay the results. I was free from that. I was totally fine. Negative. No AIDS. But I think one of the reasons why they may still do that is because they don't want other people to know. And it's like the same thing when it comes to this pandemic. COVID. If someone has COVID, there's this immediate cootie, arm's length, stay away, quarantine yourself. There's this, nobody wants to be around you. And again, when he talked about that mob mentality, if someone was, God, if you think back in the day with the Black Plague of Europe that swept over 250,000 people within that time frame, the mob mentality of villagers who saw people that were sick, if you don't think they wanted to be rid of them, to kill them off, you were wrong. Yeah, they wanted them dead already. It's like, stay away from us or we'll kill you because we're not going to catch your disease. It's a fatal disease. At that time, they still didn't know how it was going to stop. It wasn't just that plague, but the Black Plague was the largest, basically like an epic scale that no one knew when it was going to stop. And people suddenly were learning about hygiene and when to wash your hands and then to wash your food and make sure that, everything is sanitary before you put it in your mouth. And that you wash your hands after you eat so that you don't get residue on anything else. So think about that. This is the reason why hygiene is so important. It's this fear that if one gets it, people are going to want to stay away. They're going to abandon you. And it's like, this disease was taking people out right and left. Your immune system is no good. And if you come down with a sickness, you have very little time because your body doesn't have the ability to fight it because you have no immune system. So it's scary. I'm glad that the book had a chapter called Saturn because during the lecture, he mentioned something about Saturn return. And I had no idea what RuPaul was talking about. This is what he says. I knew there was such a thing as a Saturn return. In astrology, the Saturn return is the transit that takes place in your late 20s. For me, it was the moment in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy finally takes a peek behind the curtain and says, wait a minute, this is all there is? This isn't what I signed up for. When it comes to the original Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy's told of the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, and he looks like this big floating head. Reminds me of Zoran from the Power Rangers. This wizard seems like the almighty powerful. Do not mess with me. I am the ruler here. But then Dorothy's dog Toto goes around and Dorothy's looking at him going, what the heck is he doing? And Toto starts to pull away the curtain. They suddenly see that there's a man at the controls. It's a man with a machine. All of this is theatrical. It's illusory. It's not real. A little later on, in Supermodel, he mentions something about the Statue of Liberty. And for those who have had the opportunity to climb the steps to the crown of the Statue of Liberty, even those that back in the day had a chance to go all the way up to the torch, that's not allowed anymore. I'm not even sure what the rules are. He says this. At a point, he was recording a song, and he says, while recording, my eyes were set on the Statue of Liberty as she towered high over the harbor, looking like the supermodel of the world. I thought about all she represented, a symbol of America, this place where ordinary people willed impossible dreams into reality. And that's one of the reasons why so many people come here. You think about the early immigrants of the 1880s when you had the Russian Jews escaping the pogroms, which is talked about in Ziana Michael's Lily of the Valley. People were getting killed right and left. And for family members to put their kids on those ships, to have them see that Statue of Liberty, that statue represented hope. Here you are. You are in America. We are here for you. Our arms are open for you. Our harbors are open for you to make your dreams that were dashed here to come true here. But he says, where ordinary people willed impossible dreams into reality, manifestation. It's true. Death for us is inevitable. This is when this is the chapter on Mama. This is, I believe, after his mother passed. He says, death is inevitable. It's a part of life, life's shadow. It remains taboo in our culture because we are ruled by ego, and the ego wants to believe that it can cheat death, that it can find some path to immortality. But deep down, we always know this is going to be a short run. Like that song by Carrey Underwood, It's Just My Temporary Home. It's just my temporary home. It's not where I belong. Windows and rooms, I'm just passing through. This is just a stop on the way to where I'm going. I'm not afraid because I know this was my temporary home. I love that song so much. I was crying throughout the whole time that I heard it. But yeah, knowing that this is going to be a short run. There were things born too, new things that materialized, but each birth also marked a death of something else. With money came new anxieties. With fame came new responsibilities. So it went in the endless duality, there's that word again, duality, of all things, that you could not have one without the other. Like when it comes to that saying in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. With fame comes responsibility. The more well-known, the more recognizable one becomes, they're going to be responsible for how the world perceives them. Let me just put this as an example. We had Trump in 2016. It's like, okay, well, now he's the current PR. I'm not going to actually say the word. What are his plans? And for me, he was the tweeting president. That did nothing to really help his campaign, but I had never seen a former PR tweet so much, and his rants were just like, what? You know, you have a responsibility to be the head of this country. You're the one who needs to make your people aware of what goes on elsewhere. And here you are ranting on Twitter of all things. And it's like, people are going crazy over this stuff. Just because you are president does not mean you have all the power in the world. This is why there are branches of government besides the presidency that are supposed to work together. It's not just one, which is why there is no such thing as the King's Act. Okay? So when it comes to fame, when it comes to being recognizable, you're going to start to gain a reputation. Now, we all know what happened to Harvey Weinstein, for instance. He was a producer. It's like it's weird that almost every film, dare I say it, every film that I have seen has his name attached to it. And, you know, this is a person whose name is synonymous with the film industry, but he became so famous. People didn't really have, like, any way of talking against him. And suddenly, you have the Me Too movement that says, hey, film industry, you want to know how famous this guy is? I'll show you how famous he is. And suddenly you had woman after woman after woman, even guys, saying that Harvey Weinstein sexually assaulted them. And he's paying for it. Each of us is responsible for ourselves. This is an uncomfortable truth that many of us do not want to accept. Talk about radical acceptance. We grow up wanting to believe that a benevolent force, maybe our parents, will take care of us forever. But in actuality, we can only ever control ourselves. We must let go of the safety net, of the safety vest, or stop looking for one. We must be all right on our own. Sometimes the things we are not able to let go of isn't benevolent. Sometimes we hang on to past hurts and old ideas. We refuse to let those die, that old darkness, but we have to let go, both of the things we despise and often the things that we love. Every ascended master will tell you the same thing. It's the ego that grips, and non-attachment is the path to freedom, but it never stops being difficult to let go, to say goodbye. I don't know if I'll ever be able to let go of the past hurts because as I told, and I'm going to be honest here, I'm in therapy. I had to because I mean, even though I think I've cried at every single session, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to let all that go just yet. That's just my take on things. Life can sometimes feel like an inevitable chain of occurrences, a train that runs on a track. Sometimes it chugs along, and sometimes it's so fast it feels like a runaway train. Fame was like that, especially once I had removed obstacles from the track, self-doubt, drugs and alcohol, unhealthy allegiances to other people, most of which were only ever in my head. Talk about the unconscious ruling as power here. When I put myself in the engineer's seat, the train felt unstoppable and life got exciting. But these milestones, like the death of a parent, become even more pronounced when you have the clarity to understand their significance. You have to pump the brakes to stop and listen. Hey, heads up. Life is happening. When you earn a type of reputation for being this person with this signature or whatever, you need to make sure that you keep it. You need to make sure that you keep that signature, which is you, because some people can go off the rails. There is a type of alluring thing when it comes to Hollywood, when it comes to having fame, when it comes to being acknowledged, being part of the elite, where it's almost impossible to say hi, where it's almost impossible to, because people think that stardom is this. It's really this. If you are there to be a professional actor, you're there to work. And it's like this was the person I forgot to add in. There was this documentary on the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, and it was this group of dancers from all over the world. And it was about the company and how it was formed and how it would travel, how it reached new heights. But then as the years went on, it went through a bunch of different backers, if you will, that didn't hold up to their end of the bargain. I want to say his name was M.Terekhov. His father, whom he didn't know, was a dancer. At one point, Miguel had lost faith in the company, and he told his father about it. He says, you know, Miguel, once you put your right foot on stage, you can never take it off. You have to put the left one on too. And for some see it as a career. Some say you can walk away from it. And there are some like Andrew Garfield who says, I know I will never be able to quit because this is his life. This is breathing to him. One of my favorite ballet muses, and I took ballet for 8 years. I never got the chance to go and point. I'll save that story for another time. But one of my favorite ballet muses is Alessandra Ferri, who is Italian, and she is what they call the ballerina assoluta, or the supreme ballerina. She has earned that title because of her dedication, of her passion, and her love of dance. This was maybe a few years ago. She did this interview. She says, let me stop you right now. She says, for her, ballet is not a profession. Ballet is not a career. Ballet is life. It's oxygen. It is breath. She can do this for the rest of her days. I think only when it's her time that the dancing stops. Or does it? The greats. Stephen Sondheim, he's probably up there. I know he's up there making his next musical for the ones who didn't get that chance. Think about your passion. Think about the power within you that you have been waiting to answer. Do you consider that a career? Do you consider that a passion? Do you consider that a profession? Because a profession is something you can walk away from. A career is something you can walk away from. But if it's something, a passion, there's no end to that, if that makes sense. This one I felt was the most true to how I'm feeling in my life at the moment. So at one point, this is after he met George. RuPaul was always chasing after men because he never got that chance to be as affectionate or as close to his father. And it was like every single man that he met just seemed to be like the same kind of no-show, not permanent person who would be there as his rock. At this point, he says, after he meets George, for the first time, I found myself wondering, what would it feel like if I was the one being chased instead of the one doing the chasing? And it's like what he was saying earlier about manifestation, how stars make their signature known. Whether or not Hollywood comes calling or whether other venues come calling, you just keep doing what you're doing because you love to do it. And I remember this podcaster who was waiting to see about getting interviewed for this particular podcast show. She said at one point, she says she knew she was not going to be able to be interviewed at the point where she was then. So then she took steps so that she could become recognizable. That they came calling. They came chasing. I've tried to reach out to people, and I said before that I shouldn't have to be so well known in order to reach out to the well-knowns. And it goes back to what Ziana Michaels had stated in Lily of the Valley. The American dream does not require people to sacrifice or to sell their souls. That's not required of us. What if we stop chasing after people that we want to reach out to when they're the ones who will be reaching out to us? So I'm hoping that will be the case. And speaking of being chased, he did say something about that when I became a celebrity, Miami was my biggest market. So even when it comes to being recognizable, you will have certain markets that you will cater to more than others. And then he says, and when he was being paid at these gigs that paid like what he would consider would be like the king's ransom, he says, the money had never meant that much to me. All it meant was additional security. Even when I didn't have a dime, I always felt rich because I knew I had imagination. Having money to me was like having a tank full of gas. It didn't mean much if you didn't know where you were going or didn't have the curiosity to enjoy the ride. Money made things easier, much easier, but no matter how poor I'd been, I had never felt as impoverished as the rich people I knew who had no imagination, whose capacity for fun was stunted. That's an interesting anecdote when it comes to money, but it's like, when you're being paid for these gigs and more security, your net worth starts to grow. You look at people who are able to afford these $1 million homes and being able to have all the privacy in the world and that they can have a life of quiet to come home to outside of the whole celebrity spiel. it's good to have it. It's good to accumulate it as much as possible. When you invest your money into a type of savings deposit that will earn greater interest, it's going to build up over time. Because I mean, who knows what's going on with who knows what's going on with Social Security? Who knows what is going on with retirement funds? Who knows what is going on in our economic state right now? Right now, nothing feels secure. So you are lucky if you have even a part-time position, maybe 2 or 3, like I do. Outside of this, I am working 3 part-time positions. 3. So it's not easy, and I'm paying for my own insurance. And it's like, what I don't like is that there is no fixed statement. It keeps going up. I'd like to know why that keeps happening in the first place. It's crazy. At some point, George told RuPaul that he was addicted to crystal meth. And it's interesting how some of these drugs that were actually the real thing also meant something else. He says, I knew what this meant. Crystal meth meant anonymous sex. It meant high-risk behavior. It meant brain damage. It meant an extraordinarily high degree of danger. So then they checked into the South Beach clubhouse. Walking in it looked like every bad movie about alcoholism I've ever seen. The awareness didn't take long. It came on strong and clear and loud, almost instantaneously. This was where I belonged. When you hear your story told through someone else's mouth, you know you've arrived at the right place. This was where I belonged. It felt like a fantastical trick had been played on me. George was the one in rehab, and yet I was also hitting rock bottom. I had walked right into the house of hidden meanings. The last thing, which I find is very powerful, is from the chapter called Home. I had to be motivated by joy, by colors, music, laughter, dancing, and creativity, all the things that made life worth living. And the ability, as I learned when I was a little boy, to create magic from nothing. It's interesting to hear his life story and how he created something from nothing. But that nothing was like a type of what he called, of what someone had said earlier about this type of beautiful nonsense. But that beautiful nonsense became reality. It's like one's imagination, that they dream of this or they can pretend to be that. All of that is part of this beautiful nonsense. You can imagine it. Now turn it into something real. Take nothing and turn it into something. So those are the book reviews for Ziana Michaels and RuPaul. Queens of fashion, sorcery, and drag all put into one. And my own anecdotes, my thoughts on what it means to have power, what it means to manifest, what it means to be a citizen of this country, and what it means to be different, what it means to be yourself, and to make the most of what you have while time allows. What happens when the clock stops ticking? Do we necessarily stop? I personally think our work continues. And when it does, that becomes part of our legacy. Continue on my book Dragons. To all my readers out there, I will see you all next time. And keep on reading.